Hi friends! In this video you'll see my whole process for drawing this little cardinal. You've seen this reference before in the course, but in this video you'll see the whole process from start to finish. I chose this reference because it made me smile. Plus the shapes in his body and hairstyle caught my attention. So I'll keep this in mind as I work on this illustration. One thing that I want you to get from this level is that there is no right way to start an illustration, or even to finish it. The important thing is to keep all the tools you've learned on the previous level in mind and pay close attention to your reference. If you look at it long enough, your reference will tell you how to start. What you have to do is look at your reference and find that first thing that catches your attention. Each reference is a different challenge, and every drawing is different. So you might start one drawing by focusing on the negative space, another one with the shapes you see, one with the angles or the movement. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that you draw what you see, what calls your attention, and what you want to portray. As with the rest of this course, I will be using my Feels Like Pencil for Procreate brushes during all the illustrations on this level. You can use the sample set you got with the course or your favorite pencil brushes. I like using pencil brushes for drawing because I really feel like I'm working on my sketchbook. Okay, let's get started. To start, I'll open the Reference tab. To do this, I go to the wrench icon and to the Canvas tab. Then I turn on the reference. Once the tab is opened, I go to the Image and Image Import, and I choose my reference. Now you can zoom in, move it around, change the size, etc. To start, I like to choose the Quick Gesture brush. Now, I'll spend a few moments staring at my reference before I start to draw. Focus on the basic shapes, the lines, the angles, and start to break it down in my head. Once I feel ready, I start this drawing with a quick line of action. I felt like the first one was a bit off, so I try it again. This one's more like it. I move my line of action to the place that my bird will be. I start with the biggest shape I see, which in this case is the body. So I start to draw an oval for that. I add to my oval to make the chest and the belly. I draw a small circle to create the curve that goes from the wings to the beak, and a bigger one for his head. I draw a quick oval for his neck, measure the angle that I see in his chest, and transfer it to my drawing. I take my moment to stare and analyze my reference a little bit more. And I continue to measure the angles on his head and transfer that into my drawing. I do the same for the other angles in his head. I can see that there's a triangle for his little rocker hairstyle. Once I have those shapes there, I try to focus on the rhythm of the lines. Now, I'll continue to measure the angles on the beak. And the one for his wings and the back. When I zoom out, I see that my sketch is a bit too big, so I make my sketch a bit smaller using the selection tool. I continue with the angle for his tail. I feel like there's something off with my sketch though. So I take a moment to analyze my reference and compare it to my drawing to see where my mistake might be. I check the negative space, the shapes, the angles, the measurements, and I see that in my reference the belly is 3 heads away from the tip of the punk hairstyle. So I fix that. I measure the angle from the tip of his wing to his belly, and I continue to clean my sketch with very soft and messy lines. I keep comparing the angles. And I move on to his beak. And a small circle for his eye, I can see that my sketch is still a bit too big for the canvas, so I make it smaller with the selection tool. I fix the angle of the wing because it's a bit off. And keep on building my sketch, comparing the negative space. I start to darken some of my lines and add the shapes that I see in my reference. I zoom in a bit and notice that he's a bit chunkier than I drew him. So using the lasso tool, I select the line from his neck, chest and belly and move it a bit to the side. I keep on comparing my sketch to the reference image and defining it. Using quick lines, I try to catch the rhythm of the line I see in his wing. With quick lines, I begin to break the wing into smaller sections. I focus on breaking it into basic shapes. I continue to define his face more. I take some time to compare the sketch to my reference. I check the angle for the tail once again. It's looking good, so I darken my lines, and I continue to define my sketch. Now, I'll measure the angle for the legs, and I transfer that angle. I measure the leg in the background and transfer that angle as well. Now that I have that, I move my eyes back and forward from my reference and fix things that I see are a bit off. I zoom in and clean the beak and face a bit. I'll stay in this stage for some time, making sure that the angles and the shapes are in the right place. I can see that the beak is a bit too big in comparison to my reference, so I take my time to fix that. His eye is a bit too high, so I select it and move it to the correct place. I continue tweaking and adding the features to his face. Notice that I'm taking my sweet time and making sure that I have a strong sketch before moving on. I take time to look at my reference and compare it to my drawing. And I take this time to fix the things that are off before moving to a more serious drawing. I'm not caught up in the details just yet. I'm making sure that every piece is in the right place. And once I'm happy with how it's looking, I start to darken the darker areas. This is still not my final drawing. I'm still in the sketching part of the process, so I'll keep it loose and messy, and not worry myself with any final details. I like to have as much information about my subject laid out on the canvas before I start to render it. I keep working on his legs and the fence he's standing on. I measure the angles and compare the negative space. I keep on building the fence slowly. I'm making the whole sketch a bit smaller, and I'll keep fixing the things that might be off on my sketch. For instance, the angle on his wings needed to go a bit more downward. I keep comparing angles and building my sketch until I feel ready to move on to the next steps. I can start to bring in a bit more detail, so I'll start to make lines for his feathers. And using my kneader eraser, I start to add some detail to his face. I work on the highlight on his eye and the ones on his face. I start to work on his feathers. I'm paying close attention to the reference and taking my time to break this complex shape into smaller, simpler shapes. I do the same for his tail. Now I'm reworking the negative space that I find from this tail to the fence. And I do the same for the rest of his body. I also start to find the shapes in the shadows and start to add values to my sketch. Very softly, I draw where the shadows will go and the shapes they make in my little bird. I make sure to save the areas that have highlights and darken the areas that I see are darker. Even at this point, I'm rechecking my angles and fixing the things that are a little bit off. I keep on building the values of my sketch. I like doing it this way because the more information I have before the final rendering, the easier it'll be for me to create a realistic drawing. I keep building the shadows up. Here's where you can see that I wasn't lying about the number of iterations that I go through when I'm drawing. I just keep on measuring everything and changing small things. It's very important for me to spend time making sure that my sketch is accurate. That usually means a bunch of changes along the way, and that's okay. The more time I spend on a sketch, the more and more detailed it'll become. I take time to make sure that the shapes I see in the shadows are also correct. And I use different values to add depth to the sketch. I measure the tail once again, and it's still a bit off, so I fix it. I continue to darken the lines I'm more certain about. I keep building up my values and adding more details to my sketch. For me to add a more defined range of values, I need to add a soft medium tone all over my drawing. Once I have that, I use my neater eraser brush to lighten up the areas that I need lighter. I follow the shapes I see in both the shadows and the highlights for this. And I keep working on my sketch like this. I feel there's something a bit off about his little punk rocker hairstyle. I zoom in and I fix it. I'll define the wings a bit more and make sure that I'm looking at my reference and following the shapes I see there. You can also use some editing tools in Procreate to fix your sketch and move things around. Things like the Liquify tool, for example. For that, I go to the range icon and select Liquify. This allows me to move the pixels around and quickly fix some lines that might be off. I try to use this tool as little as possible though, just saving it for when my sketch is a bit more complete. I'm happy with how my sketch is looking, so I'll move on to the final stages of my drawing. To do that, I start by making a new layer and placing it underneath my sketch. I set out the sketch layer and multiply and lower the opacity. With a light medium tone, I start to add a base value to my drawing. I'm using my soft graphite fill brush for this. I zoom in and add the base color to the positive space of my drawing. I'll also change the tone of the background to match my reference. I'll make a new layer on top of the background color to add some interest to the background. Using the graphite cloud brush, I follow the reference image and add darker values and lighter values where I see them in the background. I'll leave it like this for now. I go back to the soft graphite fill brush and make a new layer on top of the base color of the cardinal. With a lighter tone than the base color, I follow my sketch and add the lighter areas. I make sure to keep paying attention to the reference image to make sure that everything is placed correctly. I work slowly and delicately. I take a moment to look at my reference before I keep adding to my drawing. And with an even lighter tone, I keep building the light in my drawing. Trying to use as many values as I can to make my drawing more interesting and realistic. I move my eyes back and forward between my drawing and the reference image a lot. Once I'm happy with how everything is looking, I choose a darker value and I start to add his mask and the other dark details. I add these details slowly and carefully. And even though I'm following my sketch, I keep checking in with my reference all the time. I need a sharper brush for these details, so I choose my raw pencil brush to add more detailed strokes to his face. I start to fill in the eye. I add the highlight on the eye and small details around the face. I go back to a darker value and start to define the beak. I start to add shadows very gently to add volume to the beak. I continue to add small details all over his face using small and soft lines to give the impression of the small feathers there. At this point, I notice that the face has more contrast against the background in the reference image than in my drawing. So I go back to the layer where I added interest to the background and with the graphite cloud brush and a lighter value, make the area around his face a bit lighter. I go back to the bird and with the raw pencil brush, I keep adding shadows slowly. I keep gently building my drawing up. I move on now to the wings. I start to add the darker areas where I see them. I go back to the raw pencil and zoom in on my reference. I follow it and my sketch to add the feathers in the wings. I take my time and follow the reference. I start to softly darken the areas that I see are darker on his wings. I keep softly building up the volume of my illustration. Now, I start working on the shadow underneath the wing. I press my pencil gently on the screen to build it up softly. I also try to take my time and compare my drawing to the reference every few minutes. I wanted to fill in the shadow areas quickly, so I changed to the yummy graphite fill brush. I begin to darken other areas around his body to add more volume. And following my sketch and the reference, I add the shadows. I press my Apple Pencil softly against the screen. This allows me to build the shadows up gently and make them interesting. I use the knitter eraser to bring back the reflected light on the belly. I use the raw pencil to add smaller and sharper details in the shadows, like small lines to make the small feathers. I move on to the legs and define them a bit. I'll keep adding quick lines to the body to make him look a bit fluffier. I define the tail a bit more. I want to add more to the background. So using the dirty crosshatch brush and a lighter tone, I'll add more to the background. I smudge that out a bit, and using the graphite dust and a darker value, I add some extra texture to the background. Then, I choose the Willow Graphite Fill brush and start to work on the fence. I won't be putting too many details here because I want the focus of my drawing to be on the bird. I'll go back with the raw pencil and add some lines to suggest the texture of the wood. I try to do this kind of fast. This will help guide the eyes to the bird and keep it in the focus point of my drawing. I darken the shadows a little bit more all over the bird. Add a few finishing touches to my drawing, and with a lighter tone, I define some of the highlights of the body. I'm happy with how my drawing is looking, so I'll just close the reference tab and add a bit more interest to the background. I choose the graphite dirty brush, and I added a bit of that and lowered the opacity of the layer. And with that, my drawing is done. As you can see, in order to make this illustration, I used all the tools that you've learned in this course. And I combined them in a way that felt comfortable for me. Drawing is a little bit like a puzzle, and these tools are ways to help you find all the pieces of your puzzle. Today, I draw much more intuitively, but when I started, I would try conscientiously to spend a lot of time looking at my reference and finding that first thing that catches my eye. Once I had it in the paper, I would look back at my reference and find what the next thing that catches my eye is. I suggest you try doing this next time you draw something. And with each drawing, this process will feel more and more natural to you. Remember that if you get frustrated while you're drawing, the best thing to do is to walk away from your illustration for a few minutes, or for as long as you need. And when you're back with fresh eyes, don't feel afraid to take your illustration back a few steps and fix the things that you can see are not matching your reference. And always keep in mind that drawing is not a talent, but a skill that anyone can master. It just takes practice. Another thing that can be very useful is sharing your art with other people. This way, you can always get feedback, and this will help you get better and better. So remember to share your art in the Design Cuts community, so we can all grow together.